You're listening to the Get Out and Drive podcast, fueled by AMD, with your hosts, John, Custom Car Nerd Meyer, and Jason, Old Car Guy Carr. We'll be bringing you gearheads everything you never wanted to know about cars and why they should be on the road and not in your garage. Are you ready to get out and drive?
I know a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff, and I did not know about this at all.
And you're a car guy.
Yeah, car guy. And I know a lot about stuff and a lot about G-bodies, but no idea about this.
If you guys are just tuning in and you've seen the topic of what it is we're going to be talking about, you're probably scratching your head. And we will dive into what it is we're talking about here in great depth. Before we do that, I need to ask John a simple question. John, what does Saddam Hussein, the Chevy Malibu, and the Maple Leaf have in common?
Ooh, this sounds like a bad joke.
It was a bad joke back in 1982.
3 nuns walked into a bar. You think the first 2 would have said something?
Oh, do you give up?
I have no idea what the hell you were talking about. I know a lot about G-bodies. I had several. I've owned several. I'm stumped, dude. I have no idea.
In Canada, back in the early 80s, there was a deal that took place between GM Canada and Iraq, which in today's colloquial terms is commonly referred to as the Iraqi taxi. You see, back in the early 80s, Iraqi taxi.
Okay, I thought I heard that. All right, so you have my attention.
Let me clarify, and we'll talk a little bit about the nature of this deal. In the early 80s, Iraq was basically at war with Iran. They had bad ties with the U.S., in so much so that the U.S. had imposed sanctions upon Iraq. Therefore, when this great big deal of wanting 25,000 cars to be produced and shipped to Iraq via GM's whatever, that took the U.S. right out of the storyline here because their relations were severed economically.
So now wait a second. Who ordered 25,000 cars?
Saddam Hussein.
Who? What? Saddam?
Yeah. Yep.
Saddam like G-bodies.
Well, apparently so. Until he got them.
Oh.
You like this car? You think you hate this car now? You wait till you drive it.
That's true.
So what happened was, in GM's infinite wisdom, they said, okay, well, if we can't sell them through the U.S., we're going to go around the sanctions. We're going to skirt those a bit. And we're going to go to our assembly plant in Oshawa, Ontario, where we build these Chevy Malibu G-body cars. And we are going to create a spec car destined for Iraq to be used as basically taxis. And there was no other company on the planet at the time who was able to fulfill the size requirements, the option requirements, and simply the price point requirements of what it was being asked.
Wow.
So along comes a spec 1981 Chevy Malibu. And
wow,
they were oddly specced. And we'll get into that here in a minute.
Here's your reminder to support the companies that support your right to get out and drive.
Auto Metal Direct is a premier manufacturer of high-quality restoration parts for classic American cars and trucks. AMD offers a wide range of components including body panels, trim, glass, weather stripping, and much more, crafted to meet or exceed original equipment specifications. Be sure to visit autometaldirect.com as you get your ride ready to get out and drive.
Hey guys, I'm Jason with AMD, and you're watching the Get Out and Drive podcast. Check this out.
Jump in and join the Get Out and Drive podcast, What Drives Youth initiative, by supporting these organizations that support the next generation in the automotive industry.
Operative Talent is committed to inspiring and empowering the next generation of automotive professionals. Learn more at operativetalent.com.
The RPM Foundation safeguards the critical skills necessary to restore and preserve collector vehicles by supporting hands-on training and engaging the next generation of craftsmen and women. Learn more at rpm.foundation. So, John, you're GM Canada, and your phone rings, and it's Saddam Hussein. Are you a fanboy?
That's a rough call. That has to be like super financially driven. Because he wasn't friends with a whole lot of people in the world.
No, and the ones he was friends with were helping him fight these wars.
Right.
Why do you suppose they ultimately settled on the Malibu?
My guess is cheap, high production, drivetrain availability. I don't know. Maybe you have more.
Well, one would think so. If we go back into our timeline and we say, okay, well, why was the Malibu so popular? Why were G bodies in general so popular? Yes, they had several different powertrain options, and pretty much all of which were damn near bulletproof. Okay, so out of the V6 engines, these Iraqi taxis were donned with the infamous, not infamous, the famous 3.8 liter V6, which went on to become several different generations of that same setup. We saw them in the G-body Buick Grand Nationals, which they turbocharged. We've seen them all the way up into the Buick Park Avenue Ultras when they went front-wheel drive and they supercharged them.
Mm-hmm.
This engine and this drivetrain, this was around for a long time. They then decided we're going to option these out with a 3-speed manual.
What a dog.
Again, it was a dog, and I'm sure they probably had some stupid 270 gear ratio in the rear, so they wouldn't even spin on sand. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe that was the deal.
Yeah, 273 with a 3-speed can't get out of its own way.
Right. So when they did that, they said, okay, we've got this car. This platform we love the platform. All you G-body guys out there know exactly what we're talking about. They're sought after in any form, whether it was the 2-door coupes, whether it was the 4-doors or the wagons. We all loved these, and we still do, these G-body Buick Regals, Olds Cutlass. What else was out there? Pontiac Grand Prix and the Chevy Malibu.
Right.
So that of the day was what these G-bodies were. And because of price point, they only came in a few colors, right? Tan, silver. I think there was a light blue in there somewhere. They were 14-inch steel wheels, dog dish hubcaps, tweed or vinyl seats. They had the rear window defrost delete. You don't need defrosted windows in the desert. The rear door windows did not roll down. That
like a station wagon.
Kind of like a station wagon because they had the vent windows, the quarter windows.
Yeah, the 4-doors, the windows don't go down in the back.
Yep. And they had an odometer or a speedometer that was registered at 200 kilometers an hour. So for those of you that listen to this podcast that can't do the conversion, that's 125 miles per hour. Like that's nothing in 1981 was registered above usually 80. Do I stand
on US mandate for 55 miles an hour. For those of you can remember the little circle over the top of the 55, and your speedometer only went to 85.
Yeah.
That's
So these cars,
the fun thing about the DeLorean that could go to 88 miles an hour. They had to have a special speedometer made, but that's a whole different topic.
so now that you guys kind of know what the car was, John, what are your thoughts on this initial, this thing is destined for the desert. What do you suppose are a few extra options that these things need to have to survive in, 110-degree weather on a daily basis?
Air conditioning. I mean,
Yep.
you got back windows that don't go down in a car.
Yep. So they were equipped with air conditioning and a heavy-duty 4-core radiator, which again proved to be problematic, which leads to the demise of this deal, which again we're going to get to,
because all of these were ordered as severe duty taxi, high mileage, severe duty cars.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep. So you're driving them in the desert, some of the hottest places on the planet on a daily basis, and they send a Chevy.
A 231 Buick V6, and even then they were. I don't know if that was a carbureted special for for that situation, but I know I've had several 80, 81 Buick V6 G bodies, and they had computer feedback carburetor, and that was a terrible mess.
Yeah, and those cars had all of what, 100 horsepower.
I think BHP on that was about 100 horsepower, and that was probably very forgiving.
Yeah. So, like we look at it, knowing what we know now, not just about these cars, but about this particular drivetrain and the car itself. They're nowadays we look at them and say, well, they were pretty reliable. We thought that they were, and in Canada and in most of the U.S., where we're not talking about extreme use. They were daily drivers. Somebody was putting 15 to 20,000 miles a year on these things, and they were fairly reliable. But let's up the ante. Let's daily drive them in severe taxi conditions, severe heat conditions, city driving, and all of a sudden these things were plagued with problems.
I had done a little bit of research after we talked about this, and I think sand was a big deal.
Absolutely was. Yeah, it doesn't matter how many cores your radiator is. The fins will catch sand.
Well, right, especially because you've got a radiator that's going to be a 4-core, and it's going to be nothing but a scoop shovel for sand, and you've also got a condenser in front of that. And all of that situation is going to become extra heat for the engine anyway. That's crazy.
Yeah. Severe duty suspension, almost like a cop car. So these things sat a little higher than your standard. That did help with airflow. But nonetheless, we're still talking, severe. So the sand became an issue. It was plugging up the radiators and the condensers. So the ACs would run hot and they would quit. The cooling systems would run hot and overheat. The clutches in these 3 speeds tended to be a little bit of a problem. So much so that GM sent tens, if not hundreds, technicians over there to service this updated clutch system on these cars, again costing GM money. The initial order on these cars, John, was $25,500.
Wow.
All of which 13,000 made it to Iraq before Saddam Hussein, his infinite wisdom, canceled the deal mid-shot. Some are saying because of build quality. Most are saying because he was running out of money fighting a war with Iran. Regardless, the Canadian government stepped in. long before Saddam Hussein ever canceled the deal. Canadian government stepped in and said, we guarantee this deal.
They bailed them out.
They bailed them out. The Canadian government said,
Wow.
if whatever they don't buy, we will. We'll guarantee them. So along comes 12,500 remaining Malibu Iraqi taxis that the government subsidized heavily so that they could sell them at a Canadian dollar. Listen to this. I'm going to give you the Canadian dollars. I'm going to give you the inflation for today's money, and then I'll convert it into USD. In 1981, they were selling these to Canadian consumers for 6,800 Canadian dollars.
Wow.
Add inflation to 2025 Canadian dollars. That's $24,000 for a brand new car. That does not exist in 2025.
Seems pretty cheap.
Just so we're clear. And 24,000 USD is 17,000 and change US dollars.
Wow.
That's a brand new car, regardless of the spec.
So in $81, that was $400, something like that?
Around that. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. I mean, you could barely get a Volkswagen Bug or something like that in the US for that price at that time.
Yep. So again, we're talking Canadian market, and you guys down there, you didn't see these cars because they were spec.
I've never seen one at all.
Yep, because they were spec for Iraq. They weren't even spec for the Canadian market. They were emissions exempt.
Like
And
no
the Canadian
cat,
government
no
was
nothing, no.
I don't know about the cats, but I do know
Okay.
that they were emissions exempt.
Okay.
And the Canadian government just turned a blind eye to that and bailed these things out so that the Canadian consumer could buy them and buy them cheap. Oshawa, Ontario, GM Oshawa plant employees were absolutely pissed because they got shipped out to dealers before they had a chance to buy them. They wanted them. They wanted to buy them.
They wanted the cars because they were cheap.
Yep. And they were building them. They knew the quality.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew that they would last in Canada. These cars were such a hot topic back then that in almost every community you could see them going. I had a middle school teacher who had one. In fact, I actually got to drive that car later on when in life. Him and I became kind of close friends. I would babysit his two boys when I was in my teens, just trying to earn a few extra bucks. And there was a few times where he would just tell me when he come home from wherever he was going, he says, here, you could just take my car home and I'll come pick it up in the morning. So I've driven that car a few times. And I mean, back then you're 16, 17 years old and you're thinking you got the world by the balls and these things were just dogs. They were gutless.
Right.
Not very well optioned out. The AC did not work in this particular car at that point in time. But you know what? They had that distinct 3.8 liter sound. They had a little throatiness in the exhaust. And you saw them going everywhere. 3-speed manual, 3.8.
I've seen a couple down here in the States, and I don't know if they're Canadian built cars or not, but I've seen a couple that are manual G bodies. Very, very scarce down here. I've seen a couple that were like station wagons, just completely strippers, bench seat manual, and a couple of bucket seat cars that were manual. But over the hundreds of thousands of G bodies I've seen, I've seen probably 4 or 5 manual, factory manuals.
We've talked about this before about getting stripper cars with just kind of bare bones and this and that. And you and I, for the most part, would likely prefer a pretty bare bones vehicle. The less electronics, the less computer, this and that, the less problems you're going to have in the long haul.
Hey, you're watching the Get Out and Drive podcast, and I'm Jason with AMD. Check this out. It's Blinky, but it's not Pac-Man Blinky.
Yeah.
My gosh, Eddie, you're old.
Here's your reminder to support the companies that support your right to get out and drive.
Racing Junk has been a longtime supporter of our podcast. You may have seen us podcasting live from the Racing Junk booth at SEMA and PRI. Racing Junk is the world's #1 racing and performance marketplace. You just can't beat their free classifieds filled with cars, parts, antiques, trailers, and more.
Be sure to speed over to racingjunk.com to find those parts you've been looking for or to list the stuff that's taking up space in your garage for free.
Is this a spec car that John Meyer in 1981 would have jumped on board for, 6,800 Canadian dollars?
I don't know. Maybe. With the intent of doing something different with it. Yeah.
And that's just it. Like the small block Chevy was still a huge thing. You could have dropped any powertrain into this car on a weekend and had yourself a pretty damn good hot rod in a light. What did those things weigh? Like 3,000 pounds?
I think it was 26 or 28.
Yeah,
something like that. I think the wagon and four-door were a little heavier than the coupe.
So you drop a V8 into one of those things. That's a little rocket ship.
And you have to worry about getting a clutch pedal and all that jazz out of an S10.
Right. So that's the story on the 4th generation G-body Chevy Malibu. In 1981, the Canadian government stepped up to the plate to try and make this deal happen with Iraq so that those people could have taxis spec'd out for their climate. Granted, didn't work out, but when GM Canada and the Canadian government saw $100 million on the table, they jumped at the chance to make this deal happen regardless, and they did. They put the deal together. They built 25,500 of these cars, sent roughly half of them overseas. I'm sure as I am standing here today that there are Iraqi taxis still roaming the streets of Baghdad. Is that where Baghdad is in Iraq? Like, I'm sure they're still out there. Dry climate, they're not going to rot away. They're going to sun fade away.
Well, they have to. I mean, they have to be popular. I'm sure somebody out there that's listening can tell us, if you've seen one over there. I mean, that anywhere, UAE, all that stuff over there, they love square body GM trucks. And for whatever reason, Suburbans and long bed step sides, oh my, they are everywhere over there. And for some strange reason as well, square Caprice.
Yep.
I don't know why. I mean, I'm not interested in it. Maybe somebody is, but over there, it's that seems to be a big deal. So that era, maybe they found a good home.
And if you're watching this on a platform and you can see us right now, we're going to flash up a couple of pictures here of these cars that became quite, I'm going to use the term infamous here in Canada, that became a legend in its own right. And if you've ever seen one of these Iraqi taxis roaming the streets of your hometown, let us know in the comments or in the show notes down there somewhere, wherever you can let us know. Tell us if you've ever seen one. Maybe you've driven one. Maybe you've owned one. Tell us a story that we don't know about yet. I'm in Canada. John's in the U.S. He's never really had the opportunity or the misfortune to have his hands on one of these things. But growing up as a kid in the 80s, these things were everywhere. We saw a lot of them. So you wouldn't think that 13,000 of them means a lot. But they were popular enough that even in my small town, there was 2 or 3 of them that always roamed around.
When do you think the last time you saw one? It's been a decade or more?
No, probably about 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
the son of one of the guys that works for me was looking for a car, and he found one, and it had no drivetrain, but it was an Iraqi taxi, and it was kind of this light green color, but it was spec'd as an Iraqi taxi. So it was a little too far gone. It had sat kind of off to the side in the tree rows, a little too long, but that's what happens to them when something goes wrong. They were such a cheap car that not many people opted to fix them. They just went out and bought another car. We're talking of a time where, in the early 80s, people, mid to late 80s, people were able to go out and buy a decent car for a decent price and not break the bank. Back then, even still, most households were a single income household, not like today where you have to have 2.5, 3 incomes just to make ends meet sometimes. But we see the spec on this new Slate truck that's been making its way through the internet. And if you guys don't know what that is, go look it up. I'll give you a brief overview. It's a bare bones, plain Jane. It is an electric truck, I believe, but it's just like your base Ford Ranger. Tiny little thing. 2 people can get into it. You can customize it any way you want after you buy it, but it comes as one spec, and it's supposed to be cheap. I think
it has roll-up windows.
Yep.
I think you said it has roll-up windows.
Yep. So that needs to come back. I've had this conversation with several different people over the past few years. Base model vehicles need to make a comeback, in my opinion.
I was reading of something. I don't remember what online platform it was, but I thought I saw Toyota or Nissan was going to start making a single cab, shorter long bed, but a single cab, small to mid-sized truck to compete with Maverick and Ridgeline.
Yeah, and actually, I think Ridgeline is actually outside of that. I think they want to compete.
Those are the 2 they mentioned for that. Yeah. That because you can look at a Colorado and it used to be kind of small, but you look at a Colorado and it looks like it's bigger than a F-250 was in the
80s and 90s.
In the 80s and 90s, it's giant. You see a Colorado, especially if it's 4-wheel drive, 2018 and up, Colorado, the thing is huge. Yeah, and I think they were saying for small market. I don't know.
But I think that there's still a market there. Again, we said it earlier. I'm the type of guy that if I wanted to go out and buy myself a brand new truck today, I could not bring myself to spend $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 on a pickup. I drive old stuff, and I've made the claim before. I am the original recycler of automobiles. You, me, a lot of our listening audience, we prefer to drive a lot of this older stuff, and maybe you have a newer vehicle to take your long trips on or whatever, and to each their own. I can work on my stuff. I can change a broken brand new Chinese fuel injector on the side of Interstate I-83 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Allegedly. But yeah, I mean, a handful of tools, and you can do just about anything that you need to do. A lot of the newer stuff, it's all this. It's all computer. It's a lot of this. I don't have a lot of this, and the older I get, the less and less it gets.
I was reading because of my catering company. I was reading a little about some Ford Transit, the 2010 to 2013 Transit Connect. We've got one that has panel windows on the sides. I'm thinking of changing it to tinted privacy glass. So I'm looking up, and I come across a video, and it's a conspiracy theory about Ford Transits. And I said, well, that's got my attention. Click. I learned, and they said conspiracy theory. Maybe somebody knows more about this again than I do. Certainly tell us in the comments. But they said that everybody's talking about tariffs and everything now, political, that even then they called it the rabbit tax. Or excuse me, not the rabbit tax, the chicken tax.
Chicken tax, yeah.
Chicken tax. Are you familiar with that?
Yep.
Chicken tax. And I won't get in depth on the chicken tax, but it had something to do with the mid 60s and chickens and all sorts of jazz. You people can look it up. It's stupid. But that stuff continued up until recently. And they said that that carried over even with the Ford Transits because they were trying to get the US to build vehicles in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, 90s. And they never took it away. That way you wouldn't be able to import everything from another country. Well, the US government had tariffs on commercial vehicles. They were trying to get vehicles built in the United States. Ford had this new transit platform, and they said, I want to import these. And the US said, you're getting a 25% tariff for a commercial vehicle. So Ford, in their infinite wisdom, they put rear seats in these transits and a removable floor. And when the vehicles got to the dealership, they took the seats out of them. They took put the floor, the flat floor in it, and they converted the passenger vehicles into commercial vehicles.
Evading the
Skipping the tax, skipping the tariffs. And I said that can't be right. And because I've been looking at a lot of transits and I'm always into customizing stuff. And sure enough, the rear floors in those transits, you can take the rear floor out. There's hooks for seats, there's places for seat belts, everything in there to make that a passenger vehicle. You can physically take out the panel on the sliding doors and put in a window if you want. All the electronics are there, everything is there, and it's ready. That's bonkers. I don't understand why a company would do that, but from what I read, that's true. Have you heard anything about that, Jason?
Well, I've heard that same thing, and the whole idea behind it is, like you said, it's evading this ridiculous tax. I don't want to get political, and I'm going to try to evade that as much as I can. But yes, just like in the US, we want to produce and be self-sufficient in building our own vehicles for Canada. Our market is so much smaller than the US. However, in the US, like, you want to keep as much of your manufacturing at home as possible. Why? Because it puts people to work, it builds an economy, it keeps the things moving. Mm-hmm. And that gets political. And this is what happens. So even though Ford and GM and Chrysler, or Stellantis, I guess if you want to call them, operates globally, they have several platforms around the world that they want to use in the US. And the US government says, well, okay, you can do that, but you're going to pay a premium. And so in order to avoid that premium, in this particular case with the Transit, they just built a people hauler.
Yeah, passenger vehicle.
That may have cost them an extra $1,500 to $1,000, $2,000 maybe, to put seats and seat belts and floor. And when it gets here, they take that out, and they've got a commercial vehicle, which they probably charged the extra premium on to begin with anyway, and they saved 25% tariff.
Wow. And they kept the customer base with the price point.
Yep.
Wow. I mean, I remember 80s, 90s, 2000s Asian import vehicles in the United States were heavily tariffed as complete cars. So they were bringing knockdowns over, and they were considered parts and pieces, lower tariff, build the car here. And that's why your window sticker says globally, it says US assembled with globally sourced parts.
Yep. We all know about the whole China situation, how everything like, you take a look around you right now, point at it, and I guarantee you it was likely made in China. This microphone we're speaking into, the webcam that you guys are viewing me from, in the computer that sits in front of me, likely made in China. And the whole idea of China being able to produce brand new cars at a fraction of the cost, I bet you guys didn't know that there's 100% tariff on Chinese-made automobiles. Meaning, if China can build it for 25 grand, and they bring it to the US to sell, it's a $50,000 automatically because of this 100% tariff. It doesn't make sense. Why can China build them so cheap and we can't? That's what I don't understand.
OSHA,
Right?
just my opinion.
EPA.
What did you say, Paul?
EPA.
There you
EPA. But again,
I've been there. I've been to
if they
China
can-
5 times.
if they can build these cars, yeah, so the EPA standards over there are non-existent. But if they can build these cars to meet US EPA standards and Canadian Environment Canada standards, why not let them in? The simple reason is because if they can sell it for $25,000 and all the domestic stuff is being sold for $50 or $60, they're going to undercut and nobody would buy the domestic stuff. They just keep buying the cheap Chinese stuff over and over and over again. Right? What happens when your laptop goes bad? Nobody repairs them. They throw them out. They get another one for a couple $100.
Oh yeah.
It's throwaway market. It'd be the same thing with cars. We'd have a junkyard full of 5-year-old Chinese cars. But to wrap this session up, if you guys know of a car story that you'd like us to investigate and report all of our knowledge on, then make sure you hit us up on our website, getoutanddrive.com. Scroll down to the bottom of the page where you can go to our listener hotline. Tell us what you want to hear. We'll do some research and we will make up everything that you never wanted to know about said topic and try and create a entertaining podcast for you guys. So make sure you hit us up.
Are you ready to get out and drive in 2025? Cruise on over to our website, getoutanddrive.com, for all the info you never wanted to know about our podcast. Hit us up on our listener hotline, be the first to know what's happening, get industry news, and grab your Get Out and Drive merch. Get those cars on the road on October 5th, 2025 to celebrate National Get Out and Drive Day. Visit nationalgetoutanddriveday.com for more info. Connect with us on social media. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Follow us on X at Get Out and Drive Pod. If you're looking for cool garage art, check out the lowbrow artist Richard Keel. His use of classic pinstripe lines mixed with tongue-in-cheek hand-painted images evokes the nostalgia of the 50s and 60s hot rod culture. Cruise over to stlpinstripes.com and get your one-of-a-kind artwork, stickers, and t-shirts today.
What drives you?